Zimbabwe is going to pay $351 million to white farmers to say sorry. Fellas, I don't know how I feel about this, but yeah, I think we're going to go through this together. And maybe you're going to tell me if my feelings are legitimate or not. Now, Zimbabwe has gone through a lot of things. They have said they're going to pay white farmers. Who are these white farmers? White farmers used to live in Zimbabwe. When white people occupied Zimbabwe many years ago, they also occupied the land. As they were occupying the land, they produced a lot of good from the land of Zimbabwe. They were agricultural farmers working with cows and horses and potatoes and tomatoes for the population. Obviously not for free. They will produce the goods and sell to the people. However, black people of Zimbabwe did not own the land. The land was owned by white people, mostly British descendants. Now, when Mugabe came into power, Robert Mugabe, this man, he changed things around. He brutally took land from the white farmers and gave it to the black people. And after that, Zimbabwe went south. We're going to try to get into this so we can understand. So Zimbabwe now says, sorry, we're going to pay you money for the land we took from you. Even though Mugabe took the land by force. And Mugabe believed white people, since they took the land by force, they shouldn't be paid for the land they took by force.
Yes, the land, they occupied the land illegally. They seized the land from our people.
Yep.
And therefore, the process of reform, land reform, involved their having to hand over the land.
Now, Zimbabwe said to compensate white and foreign white farmers who lost the land and property more than 20 years ago in farm seizure, meant to redress some of the wrong of colonialism. So about 4,000 white farmers lost their home and many things, goods, when the black majority country's president then, Robert Mugabe, launched a chaotic retribution program in 2000, which turned violent at time. So it was violent. It wasn't always peaceful. Basically, it was, okay, you're going to free the land or we're going to take it by force. Now, you can imagine somebody that's been living there his whole life. Let's imagine a farmer that's 40 years old. And most white farmers inherit their land from their fathers and the father from the grandfather. And that goes on and on and on. Now, imagine you've been living in a farm for 40 years. You know, you've worked so hard, you've invested, you've built, you've produced. And all of a sudden, somebody comes and says, you don't belong here. You need to give the land to somebody else. A farm that your father worked very hard on. It's very difficult to say, okay, just because I'm white, then I think I'm guilty and I have to leave the farm. So many of them refused to leave the land and it became violent. Mugabe passed on in 2019 and Mugabe said at the time that it was aimed at redressing colonial era land inequities after Southern African nation gained independence from white minority in 1980. So, before 1980, Zimbabwe was colonized by British, okay? They ruled the land, they had everything. They were the rich people. They were also the farmers producing goods and everything. The Zimbabweans were just consumers and workers, okay? Why? Because a lot of them did not have the know-how and also didn't have the money to produce goods and own land like that. However, when Mugabe came into power, he asked the white farmers, are you from Zimbabwe or you not? White farmers said, we are from Zimbabwe. So if you are from Zimbabwe, then how come all your money is banked in England and elsewhere, but not in Zimbabwe? If you truly are Zimbabweans, as you say you're born here, your grandfather was born here, then you should be banking in Zimbabwe. You should be doing that. So many white farmers unfortunately refused to do so because they felt like Zimbabwe wasn't adequate enough for their finances. And after that, Mugabe said, we're going to take the land. You need to give some land to the black people. And many whites were opposed to that idea. That is when he decided to take the land by force. After he took the land, it was very difficult, sometimes violence. Many white people ran away from Zimbabwe, crossing into South Africa and some into Zambia. Okay, so we cannot think that everybody understands geography, right? This is Zimbabwe, this is South Africa, this is Zambia. As you can see, when they were pushed out of Zimbabwe, many ran into South Africa, where there were Boers or Afrikaners, white South Africans, who are also farmers. So they were welcomed, given some land, and continued working in South Africa and Zambia. However, after that, Britain and America sanctioned Zimbabwe. They basically said you're going to be by yourself. You're not going to be able to trade because you cannot export. No other country will be able to accept to import or accept your good. And that plunged Zimbabwe into one of the most difficult time ever. And that is when a lot of Zimbabweans starting to run away from the country, because then you have no food, no money, no opportunities, no jobs, no investors, nothing. What do? You run away. But then Americans and Britain say, we did that because Zimbabwe was guided by dictator. So they did that because of Mugabe and his people. But Mugabe passed away a long time ago. Mugabe is not alive anymore. He's gone. But the sanctions are still on. And that's a good question. Now, because the sanctions are still on and things are very difficult right now, it feels like the Zimbabwean government feel like they need to do something to please the white man. I'm just being honest with you. Because, yeah, that's what it is. It feels like in order for you to be good in the world, you need to be good with them. Let me remind you here that in South Africa, it came a moment where the government wanted to do expropriation without compensation. So taking the land from white South Africans without having to pay them.
Should we get our land back? And the answer is yes. And us being the people directly and not the government. If I get land, if you're going to say we're giving land to the people, I am the people and I should be getting land, not be given a lease agreement of 25 years. What the amendment of the Constitution is saying is that if now the land goes back to the government, 25 years later the land would not belong to me. We need to go back and readdress the issue of, do I stay here or do I go?
It's time for you guys to realize where the fault is. It's political. It's got nothing to do with anything else.
Why do they need to do that? Because yes, a big chunk of the land in South Africa belongs to white people. Yes, they are the farmers, same as Zimbabwe. However, in South Africa, they were not kicked out. So maybe that's the reason why South Africa is still very stable. And taking the land from white people by force clearly will push you into a direction of suffering, like Zimbabwe. Let's not be mistaken about that. So now what's happening? What's happening is the Zimbabwean government is promised to pay 4,000 white farmers, not for the land, they say, but for the lost properties, the lost goods, the lost things that they, you know what I mean? They don't want to call it, we're paying you for the land we took from you, but we're going to pay you for the things that you had built, like your house, your little farm. We're going to pay for that, but it amounts to $351 million. Finance Minister Mthuli Ncube announced Wednesday at a meeting with diplomats that his government approved 441 applications from compensation worth $351 million from local white farmers and 94 applications from foreign farmers worth $196 million. So $350 million for local white farmers and $200 million for foreign farmers. That's what the government's going to pay. Is this okay? Is this fair to pay somebody for land that he occupied? I mean, his grandfather took it. He never took it by force. His grandfather came and took by force, beating up some of the locals, taking some of the women by force. But he didn't do anything. So if you want the land from him, he just inherited the land. You need to pay him for that. Is that fair? Or is it fair to say because your grandfather took it by force and violence, we're going to take it from you without having to pay you because he never had to pay anything? The seizure badly impacted commercial farming, forcing a country that was a key regional food producer and exporter to rely on assistance from donors. That's how Zimbabwe became. Basically, it was a producing country from a poor country. That's what happens when, the West turns against you. And in South Africa, like I said earlier, when they're trying to take the land from white people, they just put the idea on air saying we want to take the land without having to pay them. Donald Trump came forward saying, you dare to do that. You dare take land from white people. You will see. Okay. So some farmers apparently and their workers died, unfortunately, or seriously injured in the violence that included beating and rape, according to Human Rights Watch. So apparently many people got injured. Therefore, Zimbabwe has to pay. So is Zimbabwe paying to kind of clean up a little bit, just trying to find a way to be accepted in the world community? Because it feels like it's very difficult to bypass the waste in order to commerce, in order to buy and sell, in order to be a successful country. Do you think Zimbabwe should pay the money, or do you think Zimbabwe should resist to the end and continue to be suffering because there's consequences? Many Zimbabweans are going to Botswana. Many Zimbabweans are going to South Africa looking for better opportunity. What do you think should be done? Because unfortunately, alternatively, if Africans came together, helping one another, commercing with each other, having no issues with one another, Zimbabwe would not have to bow down to nobody, because then you just have to do business with, the next country. You just have to do business with Congo, with Uganda, Rwanda, and, you wouldn't feel the weight of it. But because Africans are very much separated, you have to feel the weight of it. Should Zimbabwe pay the money, or Zimbabwe should not pay the money? Is this sitting and kicking away the sacrifices of all independence hard workers, all the people that sacrificed their life during independence to get the freedom? Or do you think things have changed? It's time for a great change, and we should forget the past. God bless.